Welcome to Pytorial channel. In this tutorial we will be learning basics of Python. Since you've already come to this channel, you probably know a little bit about Python, hence why you wanted to learn it. So before we start talking about what is Python, let's jump into how to install Python. So head over to python.org and just hover over on download option, and you can just download Python 3.6.3 for Windows. If you're on Mac or other platform, you can find your installation here. So I'm going to do it for Windows. Once the download is finished, installation process is pretty simple. So I'm just going to click on that executable, just do installation, install it now. So while we wait for this to set up, let's just talk about what is Python. So it's an interpreted language, and also object-oriented and dynamically typed. So what that means is, with the other language, let's say for example C#, if you write a lot of code, for you to actually go and test that code, you need to do a process called compile. You need to a button, so it will compile all that code, all your code, into executable. It'll run the code then, so you can test what you've written and find, whether it works for you or not. Where with the interpreted language, you don't need to compile all that. It will interpret everything you've written on the fly as you test. So what that does is that saves you a lot of time, instead of waiting for it to be compiled and then check. So it gives you a lot of it makes your job easier to actually test what you've written and quickly. So the term dynamically typed means you don't need to declare your variable. So for example, if you wanna have a variable a that holds a string Bob, you can just say a equals to Bob, which we'll see after installing Python. So since you created a variable called a, and let's say for example you've created a variable called a and said Bob, so that already tells Python that Bob, a variable a that holds Bob, will be a string variable. So which happens on the fly when it's actually interpreting your code. That's when Python will figure out what type of variable that will be. So if you do num equals to 100, that's an integer. So if you do num1 equals to 100.10, that's your floating point variable. So that's called dynamically typed. So you don't need to actually do something like int a and then a equals to 10 or something like that. So that makes it pretty easy to create variables and use them. So our setup was successful. Let's close this screen, go to our start menu, type idle. You should have idle Python 3.6, 32-bit, or whatever you choose at the installation time. So we're going to run that. And now let me show you what I meant by interpreted language. So for example, I'm going to type print hello world. So what would happen if it was a compiled type language is, if I hit enter, or I couldn't probably hit enter, I would have to compile this, which will then finish compiling the code and then give me the output. Where in Python you hit a button, boom, there's your output. So that is the difference between the compiled language and interpreted language. So what are we going to do is, this is a Python shell, so you can quickly test things here like a equals to 10 and then b equals to 20. Is a is less than b? True is a is greater than b? False. Or you can even quickly test your for loops, print I, so you can do things like that in idle. Sometimes it's good. Let's say you want to do name and then you want to check, you know, what this does. Now you've got the name you tried to splice. So that's something you can do on Cell to quickly test your code or what you wanted to write and run it. So that's basically what Python is and how to install it. I will wrap this video up for now. We'll move on to more about variables and data types in Python in the next video. Thank you.